Hi, everyone. White supremacy and the myth of the one drop rule. Right now, there is a myth within the Black community. There is the idea that everyone who has some type of African ancestry self identifies as Black. It strengthens the fight against racism, discrimination, and social exclusion in the United States, which, since my point of view is just an illusion, 100 years later, when the one drop rule was imposed on people of mixed race who have some ancestor of Black African blood in their genetic inheritance, the situation of Blacks and mulattoes as a racial minority in the United States has not changed at all. For the opposite has been getting worse when you look at the high levels of institutional racism, racial discrimination, and racial exclusion. Myth associated with the one drop rule, which has been promoted by white supremacy and supported by pro Black groups with Afrocentric ideology who use Blackness as a symbol of group unity. It is time to break this racial myth, which maintained Blacks and mulattoes as the most oppressed group in the American nation. Understanding the enormous influence that the one drop rule has on the mentality of Blacks and whites is to break the myth associated with this arbitrary racial classification. It is time for both Blacks and biracial mulattoes, as a way to achieve any type of goal. From my point of view, we must break with that myth imposed by white people, in which the one drop rule is the first link in that chain, which has the Black community mentally trapped right now. When it comes to the one drop rule, there is no doubt that there is a lot of misconception, propaganda, and disinformation when trying to understand how significant the impact this mechanism of racial identity has on the lives of biracial people, but also on dark skinned Black women. How do Black women defend an identity mechanism that affects their interests? It's something I really don't understand. But in this work, we will try to analyze the reasons for this type of behavior, which affected the interests of Black women, but also the reasons why it's defended and promoted right now by Black people themselves. For a century, the idea has been sold that a drop of Black blood makes you Black, which breaks the logic when observing the different racial miscegenations between monoracial people, Blacks, whites, and indigenous, which produces biracial children. Accepting a method of racial classification which does not correspond to the genetic reality of people of mixed race is to accept a lie as if it were the truth. Don't have the slightest doubt if you are biracial, identifying yourself as Black could be considered as one drop of love for your Blackness. On the contrary, if you do not identify yourself as Black, this act could be considered as one drop of hate against yourself. The problem with this conclusion is that they both rely on a lie which you have to deny your racial heritage to please others who do not accept the different racial mixtures that are part of your genetic heritage. Why don't biracial men and women create their own space as a racial group different from Blacks? First, as a response to the emotional blackmail to which they have been subjected since the one drop rule was established as a mechanism of racial identity. Second, many biracials do not want to lose the privileges, advantages, adoration, and support associated with light skin color, hair texture, and within the Black community. Third, as a mechanism to maintain the strength that is derived from unity, taking into account the expression divide and conquer of those who possess certain levels of Blackness, in which it benefits both Blacks and biracial mulattoes in the fight for racial equality. Something that dark-skinned women should understand. Many biracial women who are products of racial privilege and beauty standards see themselves as superior and more attractive to dark-skinned Black women. There are many biracial women who pander to Black women as a way of not losing that position of superiority that they have within the Black community, especially when we talk about dark-skinned Black women who see biracial women as their allies. Some biracial women go so far as to seek validation from Black women as a way to assuage any feelings associated with the privileges and social position they have for having light skin. Right now, when you listen to many biracial mulattoes rationalizing, justifying, and explaining why they self identify as Black, They don't know the difference between a cultural identification and a racial identity when they have a white mother or father. People's genetic heritage doesn't lie, but that distorted perception that some biracials have of themselves when they see themselves as black is a lie, which many of them consider themselves a product of emotional self blackmail, but also to avoid provoking a negative reaction from dark skinned black women. For these biracials who self identify as black for fear of emotional blackmail by family and friends, they have no problem hating themselves when talking about that white heritage that is part of their genetic makeup and loving only their black heritage, which creates in them an unaware crisis of identity in which you are not who you are. You are what others see in you. You accept that you are black not because you see yourself as black, but because others see you as black, which is the saddest thing when you are biracial or mulatto, and to please others, you deny your true racial heritage. As biracial or mulatto, something that you should understand: growing up in a black family does not make you black. That your father or mother is black does not make you black. That you experience discrimination, prejudice, and exclusion due to skin color, just like blacks, does not make you black either. That you feel that you are black does not make you black. If race is a social racial construction that tells you that you can choose the racial identity that best suits not your emotions, but your genetic heritage and the type of phenotypic that makes you different from a monoracial person. In short, racial identity is not a feeling to meet the expectations of your parents, nor is it a belief system that you adopt as a result of racism, discrimination, or racial exclusion. Nor is it a cultural identity because I grew up loving black culture, much less a personal experience with which you feel identified. Being black is based on Negroid phenotypic characteristics: curly black hair, black or dark brown eyes, very thick lips, skin that goes from brownish black to black, and a very wide, flat, without nose bridge, which clearly define which racial group you belong to. Nobody can doubt the enormous influence any type of narrative imposed by the elite group in power as a result of disinformation, propaganda, information control, racially motivated legislation, and imposition has when talking about any class struggle. And let's not talk about racial struggle between blacks and whites in a society where blacks are considered less than human. For centuries, the imposition of the one drop rule of African blood, whether you want to accept it or not, is the best weapon used by groups associated with white supremacy to maintain the perpetual lower class status of those who possess certain levels of blackness. That includes both blacks and mulattoes. Right now, both whites and blacks have a different idea, experience, and conception of the one drop rule and the impact it has on the way they see themselves from a racial, emotional, social, and political point of view. For black people, one drop rule is a mechanism of racial unity in which blackness is used as the glue which strengthens and unifies the community in the fight for racial equality. For whites, it is an unconscious symbol of racial superiority which has its origin in the supremacy of whites over blacks, which is reflected in the way they value themselves, but also how they treat blacks. From my point of view, the moment the myth associated with the one drop rule is broken or ceases to exist, at that moment, the black woman and the mulatto woman break with a chain from the past that binds them both based on a lie imposed by the white man who wishes to promote the purity of the white race. At that moment, the dark skinned black woman also comes to the realization that she doesn't need the beauty of the mulatto woman to appreciate her own beauty as a black woman, much less than the beauty of the biracial woman to supplant the beauty of the black woman in all social spheres. If blacks wish to achieve racial equality in America, breaking the myth of the one drop rule is the first step to defeating the racist ideas that are still part of the collective consciousness of both blacks and whites in America. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this type of work, please subscribe to this channel and leave all your comments as a way to support this type of content.